Well, I'm very pleased and honored to be here today. It's actually my second appearance at an Accenture event to talk about my book. It's a book called Earning It, Hard-Won Lessons from Trailblazing Women at the Top of the Business World. And this book reflects interviews with 52 highly successful corporate executives, nearly 2/3 of whom are experienced public company CEOs. And I'm here today with Kathleen, who luckily for me has actually read the book. And we're going to talk about her career as it relates to some of the themes that I talk about in this book, which focuses on professional and personal obstacles that many of these women had to deal with that in the long run made them better leaders. And we're going to leave time for questions at the end of this part of the program, if we can see past the blazing lights to call on people, so you may have to wave your hands for us to see you. But I wonder, Kathleen, if you could summarize a little bit for us your own career trajectory, and then talk about times during your career where you had to take on what I call in the book a mission impossible assignment, and what were the pros and cons of doing that?
Sure, thank you. So the short version of my career is, I'll start from the back forward, working backwards. I've been at Accenture for 20 years, and I currently run our Northeast region in the United States. I've been here in a host of roles, but most of them up until my most recent one in communications, media, and technology. So as Jill said, focused on a very specific industry. And I've held a host of roles from running our management consulting practice, running our strategy practice, running one of our industry groups, being a client account lead, diamond client account lead. And prior to that, I was with some other firms, all good firms, but not Accenture. And then I came out of industry. So I actually started in industry in the communications world, working for one of the large telephone companies, actually back in the day. So that's the short version of my career. And I'm a mom of three, a wife of one, and I live outside of Philadelphia. So that's a little bit of the background. You know, in terms of Mission Impossible, I had to laugh when I read your book, because I can't help myself, since Jill just talked about, I have 3 boys, she just talked about her kids, but people who know me know that my oldest son started a rumor about 10 years ago that I work for the CIA. He's convinced. Mostly because I was flying around the world, he had no idea what he did, and he thought that I was doing something really cool, and I have let that stand with all of his friends. If you want to be cool with your friends. So the Mission Impossible question struck me as funny. I would say the first time I took on something that really turned into, I realized it was Mission Impossible, it was not purposeful, actually. Probably if I had known what I was taking on, I'm actually not sure I would have stepped into it. But about 13 years ago, after the birth of my second son, I came back to work, and I wanted to try and have some stability in terms of the travel. Even though I travel with my children, I said I want one in-town client. And so I stepped into working in the cable industry, an industry that, while it sits within our world of CMT inside Accenture, it's very different. And I did it for a bit, but really decided it was time, as Jill said, to move on. And I actually was looking outside Accenture at the time, and I was offered a chief marketing officer job for a company that was getting into analytics and data at the time, because that's something I was focused on. And I was just about to take it, and I called my boss at the time and said, hey, I need to talk to you, I've got some news. And he said, good, because I need to talk to you too. And he offered me a role taking on the cable industry in North America, and said, do you want to take on that practice? And within 24 hours, I knew I was going to take it. But my first reaction was, I didn't even know we had a practice. There wasn't much to it. And what I took on was, candidly, a place where we really had no client relationships. The team was dysfunctional and unhappy, and I stepped into what was really a mess. And
so why would you accept such an assignment, and what did you do to make sure it wouldn't be an abject failure?
Well, I didn't know what I was stepping into, so, but now I would take it readily, and I'll tell you why. The first thing is there's nowhere to go but up when you're stepping into something that really needs a turnaround. And I've learned over time that I love doing that. Excuse me. So the first thing was, it was a chance to make a huge impact. Lots of risk associated with it. Lots of people had tried before and hadn't succeeded. The second thing was that I was going to learn something new, and I love learning. So stepping into something new was really exciting, and I found that I'm a bit of a junkie around that. And then lastly, excuse me, It was a chance to completely own something end to end. Nobody else wanted it.
You were in charge.
Yeah, I was in charge and nobody else wanted it. Really, it was kind of a hands-off. And so I realized that there's the chance for impact and the chance to focus the mind on something and own it and then really feel the results. I'm one of those people that, sorry to focus on a stereotype, that likes to vacuum my way out of a room because I can see the lines on the carpet and I feel the accomplishment. And then it gets messy again. It lasts for 2 seconds and that's kind of life. But I like that sense of accomplishment, and it was a chance to really make a difference where, I knew that as soon as I stepped in, there were some people who resented me on the team and I had to deal with that, but people were anxious for somebody who was willing to jump all the way in with them, and I found I liked that.
So what was the happy ending, hopefully, to the story? What happened to that practice?
Oh, that practice grew and is phenomenally successful now. It actually was the fastest growing practice in our business after about a year and a half. So very successful story now from an Accenture perspective. And I was rewarded at the end of it with being asked to take a step back and take the worst performing part of that practice and turn that around. And so I did, which was fun.
Which frankly has a lot of echoes for what I wrote about in Earning It. Many of these women that I talked to for the book at midway through their careers, and sometimes early in their careers, were asked to do things that nobody else wanted to do, and where they saw a potential here to make their mark, but also they made sure that there wasn't a failure sign at the end of that road. They made sure that they knew what it was they were trying to accomplish, that the person who was asking them to do this had their back, and that everyone knew how well they had done when they got to the end of that assignment. Let's turn now, because you were mentioning the fact that you have 3 sons, to another part of the book, which is a chapter called Manager Moms Are Not Acrobats. And the whole point of that chapter is there's this myth that we could all have work-life balance. There is no such thing as perfect balance unless you are an acrobat. Now, in your case, you've got not only 3 sons, but they range in age from 19 years old to 18 months. How's that for a range?
Crazy.
And yet you work for a management consultancy in which you're expected to be on the road 4 days out of 5. Tell me about your life as a working mother at Accenture.
I would say that my life as a working mom has been filled with many of the questions that Jill brought up and that her son's paper actually, I thought, really eloquently put forward, which is, am I good enough on either? Am I giving enough to either side of my world? And it's really not either side, because I'm a daughter, I'm a sister, I'm a wife, and so there's always stuff pulling on you. But I would tell you that I think what's been really incredible is a few things. One is that I never knew my own capacity. I think the capacity and our power to stretch and do things that no one thinks you can do is really boundless. When I first found out I was pregnant with my first child, so he's now 19 and a freshman in college, I had a boss who told me that he would help me find another job outside consulting. And we were on the phone, and I remember I thought I misheard him, and he said, there's no way you'll be able to do this, because I was traveling globally all the time, always on an airplane. He said, there's no way you'll be able to do this, and there's no shame in that. We can help you find something, outside. It was a different name at the time in terms of the firm. And I will tell you, my back got up, and I said, now watch me do it. Because if you throw down the gauntlet, you're gonna run it. And so I took my son on the road with me, because
at what age?
At 4 weeks.
Really?
So I started there. I would not recommend that, by the way. Lessons learned: don't do that. Take your maternity leave. Don't do that. But at the time, so this is 19 years ago, I was up for partner. And so my view was, I can't afford to step back, I can't do it. And I remember I have a boss who says this can't be done. So I was out to prove that it could be done, and more for me than for him. So I decided to take my son on the road with me, which I don't think had really ever been done before. And actually it became a habit. I did it not out of necessity, but because I wanted to, for all 3 of my children.
Did you bring a nanny along?
I did not. I was working primarily in 13 cities globally, and so I researched nannies during my pregnancy, and I had 13 different agencies I work with, and a first, second, and third choice. And when I landed, they met me, and my kids are great at languages because they always speak the different languages. So it was fun. It was fun, though. My kids, they remember that. It built such a bond. I sat in a lot of galleys on airplanes with crayons and magnets that stick to the carts, coloring with my kids and then stick it, and then they bring it up and down the aisle, and people say, oh, there's a child coloring on the airplane. But it really became a part of what eventually became kind of my mantra, which is that I'm always a mom. This is a lifestyle, this job, so I'm sort of always on no matter what. And so technology allows you to be very creative. I'm always on FaceTime. I bring their school books with me. I read what they're doing. And so you can kind of balance it, but it's not a one and the other. It's kind of all the time wrapped together in a really neat way.
So your afterthought, your third child, who's 18 months old, did you take him on the road with you at 4 weeks?
I did not take him on the road at 4 weeks because Accenture actually expanded its maternity leave policy, and I had learned by the third child, I had learned that it's a good thing to take your maternity leave, and it will be there, the company will be there, and people will support you when you come back. But when I came back, though, after he was 4 months old, I took a role working actually with Julie, and everybody's met my son, right? He has traveled with me. He is, and he's really cute. Babies are really popular. It makes you really popular. My oldest son has figured that out too, by the way. It makes you really popular when you have a younger sibling with the ladies. But truly, I won't use the phrase my husband told him. But no, I took him on the road with me. Yes, I did. I've just actually stopped that. But I was committed to being with him. I was committed to nursing, and I have a working husband. He travels a lot, and so have child,
Wow.
will travel. It works, and very supported, by the way, by everybody around me.
Another big point that I make in the book, and I have an entire chapter devoted to the importance of not only mentors, but sponsors. Clearly, you've had both throughout your career. When you are trying to convince someone to either mentor or sponsor you, both internally and externally, what are you looking for?
I would say what I'm looking for is, at an overarching level, somebody who is committed to my success. I think that's what a sponsor is. I think that's what an ally is. Somebody who is there with you and they have your best interest in mind at all times. But what that really means is it also has to be somebody who's really willing to be honest with you, tell you the things maybe you don't want to hear. So it's not happy talk. I've always had sponsors, but even if you go back to the Mission Impossible job, my boss at the time said, look, whatever you do, I know you were looking outside the firm, you need to learn these things because you don't know them, and they will serve you well. So he was very willing to push me on that. So I think it's somebody who will push you. I think it's somebody who will pull you. Somebody who, I look for sponsors who are in senior leadership positions and whom I admire and I want to be around and learn from, and who will pull me while pushing me. And then sometimes people who will propel me out. And they say, look, time to fly from the nest and push you out. But I think honesty, transparency, trust, and somebody who's really committed to my success. The second thing is somebody that hopefully I can help, because it's not
got to be a two-way street.
It's a two-way street. It doesn't feel very good if it's only one way. So to me, that's a really important point, is that this is going to be a relationship. And I'm happy to say almost all of my sponsors are friends and still are.
A lot of the women I interviewed for the book, though, their mentors and sponsors were people who they work with at their current company or then company. Mm-hmm. How have you found sponsors outside of Accenture?
Well, we're lucky at Accenture because we get to work with all the biggest companies out there. And so that may sound cliche, but because of the nature of what I do, I get to operate in the environment, in the space, in the ecosystem of some really senior and brilliant people. And hopefully I'm there to help them. But many of them have offered to have that kind of a relationship. Great. So that's really worked. And then from a personal standpoint, I try to seek out people who are different than me and build that network, expand my network. And
expand your perception of the world.
Yeah, exactly. So it's all about perspective, always seeking new perspectives, hoping somebody that can give you a different perspective. And I'm kind of I'm outgoing. I talk a lot for people who know me. And so I like to reach out and get to know different people. And I don't normally ask for sponsorship or mentorship. It normally just evolves. And hopefully at this point in my career, it goes both ways.
All right, at that point, I think we're going to open it up for some questions. And, oh, good, the lights have come up a little bit so we can see. And do we have hand mics for those who want to be brave enough? I would be happy to entertain any questions you have about the book. And obviously, Kathleen would be happy to entertain any questions about how you find the nanny in Kuala Lumpur before you land. All right, we got a question down here in the front.
Hello, my name is Yvette Oo. So I had a question for you about how did you show up differently, because you have your kids. So I'm thinking about a friend of mine who travels with her kids. I actually travel with my dog because that allows me to show up differently. So I'm wondering how you show up differently in terms of your authenticity or what it does for you psychologically when you're traveling with your kids.
How do I show up differently when I have my children with me?
Yeah, like if you were taking that same trip without your kids, what would be the impact to you every day?
I'd be much less happy.
Yeah.
I don't like being away from my children. I mean, it's the nature of things. So I think when I have my children with me, because even in the summer times, when they get older, you can't just pull them out of school. But in the summer times, one advantage is I do travel a lot, and so that my children have really seen the world. We've turned, I'm going to Africa. They come, they spend some time with friends, and then we go on a trip. So they've had a lot of luck to travel around the world. And when I have my children near me or with me, I show up differently, candidly, because I'm happier. I mean, it just, you can't hide it. For me, that's the way I am. So that's the first thing. The second thing is there are some tactical realities to traveling with your children, and that is that they're there in a hotel. They're doing things hopefully in the city, depending on whatever's age appropriate, or when they're really little, they need to be fed, and you may be the source of food. And so I found ways to build in that time to make sure they actually. I would tell you, my children. My son was just actually speaking to a group of young moms and dads at Accenture, and I couldn't join the call, so he got stuck doing it on his own with Lynn McMahon's son. I had no idea what he was going to say, but apparently he did embarrass us, although I teased him and said he did. But I would tell you that his comments to me, now that he's grown, they turn out okay, was that he saw more of me because we found ways to fit it in. But I made sure I stopped at dinner time, but I might be working again later. It sounds very cliche, but there were just some tactical points that when they're there, it forced me to build in the breaks. I actually think that made me better at work, though. Because otherwise, you're kind of 22 hours, you never stop to eat, drink, get some fresh air or whatever. So they forced a rhythm that I then employed with my team, and everybody appreciated it. So I think I show up differently in that way.
That's a great answer. All right, we had another question down front here. Let's bring the mic down.
Hi there. I'm Romy Newman from Fairy God Boss. Your story is incredible. It's really inspiring, so thank you for sharing it.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask you, because I just read a great book about the motherhood or caregiver bias that really is rampant in this country, and it's certainly what you faced when you spoke to your first boss, and he said, oh, now you're becoming, and I'm sure it was coming from a good place. He says, oh, you're a mother, that means you can't be this executive anymore. Yet you've been really forward about at work in different cultures and different clients about being a mother. Have you confronted that bias again, and how do you address it?
I have. I would say, some of it is cultural. It's usually individual, though. So the first thing I decided at that moment that first happened was that I had to be clear on what I stood for. I was sort of raised that way anyway, but it forces you in those moments to go back and say, I can try and hide what I am, but I wanted to have kids. I want to be a mom. I think that's a great thing, and it's not a side thing. I love being a wife and a mom. And so I made it a decision at that moment that I think served me as I dealt with these things along the way with the looks. Because there'll always be somebody who will judge. There'll always be somebody who will doubt. And that is, first of all, that I was very forward, which said, that's who you are, but I'm very happy with who I am. So part of it is just having that confidence, I think, to stand up and say, this is a good thing. The second thing is, generally, when you explain how you do it, I find as time has gone on, people really want to learn more about it. And so their initial judgment actually turns to, that's interesting. They're smart people. They understand the world runs this way. So sharing the story and then helping people understand how they can make it work and why it's a good thing. And then the last thing is, probably the first thing, is that I'd like to say always, I've always never made it stand in the way of me doing a good job. So there has been times in my career, have been times where people have thought, well, that may make you less productive, or you're not as focused, or whatever. And in fact, as I answered before, in some ways it's made me much more productive. So the happier I am and the more I can do it all, I think the better I bring to the table, and people have realized that over time.
So why didn't your husband travel with the kids once they were past the breastfeeding stage? So you could have uninterrupted
We're
business
streaming
trips.
this, so I don't think I can answer that openly. I have an amazing husband. I will tell you that.
No, but I get asked this question
Yeah.
a lot. Like in my book, I talk about what women can do to not be sexually harassed. And several times I've been interviewed on radio shows where the interviewer will say, at what point in our history will the onus no longer be on women to make it all right?
Right. Yeah, well, so in defense of my husband, I would say a couple things. One is that I wanted to do this. I sort of thrive on doing this. So Jill talked about she likes to cook. I liked doing this, and to me, it was part of what made me feel okay about things. So it was kind of selfish in some ways.
Gotcha.
The second thing is, he has not traveled with our kids on business trips. He has often found ways to do, as I said, we sort of look for those opportunities to come together as a family. And he has certainly joined me on that when we've been in places where I've had to go work. He's taken care of the kids while we've been there, and then we've turned it into a vacation. But I would say it's more on me. And candidly, I would. My husband likes to say he's come a long way, which is a funny expression. But I would tell you that when we first started, he thought it was a little bit crazy, and now he's a boss of many, many women. And he's very open about the fact that it's really doable and is really supportive. So
that's great.
Yeah.
We have time for one more question. Well, whoever's got the mic will get to
Well, here.
Hi, my name is Justina, and I'm also at Accenture in New York City. So I wanted to first thank you as the speakers and the moderator and everyone else here for being very transparent with their stories and letting us learn a bit. My question is about mentorship, but conditional mentorship. So I had a conversation recently with someone I see as a mentor, and basically I'm at a point in my career where I have to choose an alignment or a function. So he was offering that mentorship, but conditional of if I choose his route. And I didn't exactly know what to say. So I was just curious if you have experienced that or what you've.
I'm curious what your reaction was.
She's still thinking about it.
Yeah, I'm still thinking. Any advice would be appreciated.
Go for it.
What my reaction would be, no thank you. Because I don't think there's such a thing as conditional mentorship and sponsorship. It's a gift. And so it doesn't have a quid pro quo in that. Oftentimes it's two ways, but that needs to be voluntary. So I would say that might be he's willing to be your boss or your career counselor, whatever it may be in a role if you work in that organization to support him or her, because I'm sure a woman could say the same thing. But to me, that's not a mentor, because mentorship is about the other person, not about you. And so I would respectfully actually walk from that and explain why, though. I mean, I think it's fair to say, if you say, look, I'm going to go in this direction, I would love to continue to get to know you, and I think our paths will cross, and this is what I bring to the table. So you continue that dialogue, but I would disengage from what feels a little bit like a power discussion versus a commitment to your success discussion.
And with that, I would like to thank Kathleen.